Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. Well, it's not little at all, actually. This is the Artisan Cutlery Great White, named after a shark, just as all of Gavko's other work is. Let's go on ahead and start off with a bit of full disclosure. This guy was sent to me by Artisan Cutlery. That's right. I reached out to him. I said, hey, I'd like to check this guy out. I actually asked for a couple of other ones, and they said, sure. But as always, I told them I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. It might be a gem, might be junk. They did still send it along. Nonetheless, we do have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or quality of my review. There you go, full disclosure. Next thing, let's do some size comparison. Turns out, big freaking knife. Here it is against the Spyderco Delica. Yeah, it's big. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. Still big. Here it is against the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. This remains big. And then actually here it is against another recent Artisan release that I'm going to be reviewing shortly. This is the Dirk Pinkerton Arroyo. And as we can see here, this is big. And then finally, I want to put it up against the ruler, which will give you a sense of just how big this blade is. This is bigger than 3.75 inches. This is a beefy freaking blade right here. And so absolutely 100%, this is a relatively large knife. And so there we go. Just going to clean the blade off a little bit here as I'm talking. So there you go. And then finally, just so you know ahead of time, the price on this guy is going to be $199 in the US here, which is a chunk of change. But yeah, so anyways, let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of your Artisan Cutlery Great White here. On the good side, to start with, one of the things I appreciate here is no flipper tab. This is one of those things that I think is shifting a little bit in the knife world. A lot of folks are kind of moving away from flipper tabs because not only are they in the pocket packing and whatnot, but frankly, Gavko's knives, he tends to have very obnoxious and long flipper tabs on some of his stuff. And so part of the reason I was interested in this guy is because it is a non-flipper. And I think that's getting to be a point where it's like a novelty to people. Like, whoa, a non-flipper, cool. So I appreciate that very, very much. And it also leads to good ergonomics here, which actually moves us into the next point here, which is that the ergos are solid. I have relatively small hands, so maybe it's going to be a little different for other folks, but for me, this really locks well into the hand here. I've got a nice, well, I got every finger worth of grip, plus a couple of fingers hanging off the back there if I need to. But this finger choil works very well. It locks in the hand pretty well. Plus, you've got a bit of thumb ramp action here. I'm pretty impressed with the ergos here. It's not quite as nice in a hammer grip, that is, but you know what? It absolutely works. So I do appreciate that. And the balance, by the way, is right on. Even though this has a relatively big and thick blade on it, it balances right where you'd want it to. That's great. Next thing, blade on this guy is, the steel on it is S35VN, which is an absolutely good to go sort of everyday carry steel. No problem there. It's got a decent grind. It's not the thinnest thing ever, but at the same time, it's a pretty unique grind. And actually, I should just highlight that. This is a very unique grind. We've got a sort of a compound grind, except they're both at roughly the same angle here. We've got a grind here. We've got this grind down here. And so as a result, we end up with something that is pretty unconventional, right? And this is a pretty serious recurve. This is a substantial bit of recurve down in the bottom there. And I do have to say, even if it's not necessarily a practical thing for everyday life, it definitely adds an aesthetic, and I can appreciate that. It's a little off the beaten path. Next thing, this has a good opening method here. What this has as an opening method is 100% just the flicking. So I can do this and open the knife up very, very readily. Some people are going to use their index finger, some middle, but you know what? It opens. There's no problem with that. You can, of course, also two-hand it. Nice and easy. But you know what? It works pretty well. And they've done a really nice job, by the way, with the chamfer inside of this hole here. What we see here is, yeah, it looks pretty good. It's very, very solid. So I can very much appreciate that. That little bit of chamfering is a nice detail, but it's an important one, and it gives you just the right amount of gription here without it being too sharp, without it, attacking your nails and whatnot. That's a good thing. They did that exceptionally well. So I appreciate that. Next thing, this guy has a very solid action. Not only does it have a very smooth open, this guy, I put a little wrist in it generally when flicking, but it absolutely opens without that. But it also has a very smooth fall shutty close. Mind you, the blade is thick and heavy, so that helps a lot. But the action on this guy is quite solid. I am definitely a fan of that. And so to me, all of that is the good, is that it's got a solid action, nice opening mechanism, a nice blade, solid ergos, no flipper tab on it, and it is and that's actually all I have for the good. On the great side, It is a Gavko. What I mean by that is that this is very, very much in his design language. You know, so very often, especially from smaller companies like Artisan, you end up with knives that are kind of milquetoast, right? It's just like, okay, yeah, that's a knife. It's the kind of the knife equivalent of hotel artwork, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's that. If I look on the dictionary for knife, I would see something that looks a lot like that, right? This is not that. This is very much Gavko's work. You will love that fact or you will hate it. In fact, I am generally speaking not a person who is a huge fan of the Gavko aesthetic, but you know what? I like this. I think this looks pretty good. And as far as it provides something different. It is something that is fundamentally, like aesthetically, this is off the beaten path. It's not going to be for everybody. I showed it to my wife and she said, what? It looks like it wants to be a batarang or something. And you know what? She's right. But at the same time, I can appreciate very much that this is not just another vanilla frame lock, right? Gavko is a designer with a strong following for a reason. And so I appreciate very much the fact that this knife is distinctively Gavko and pretty well done. This is my favorite of his in a good long while. So to me, at least, that's what's great here, is it is very distinctly Gavko, and I think it's a pretty attractive design. On the bad side, this is not a knife that opens. This isn't so much bad, just a point of information. It is not straightforward to open this slowly with your thumb, because as you're doing so, you're going to have your finger on your lock bar, and it's very much tuned, it feels like, for a flip opening, right? You want to have that really strong opening there. This is not something I would buy. You can thumb flick it, but it's not something you should buy thinking you're going to be doing something, more akin to the classical, slow opening with your thumb. That's not what this is designed to do. So do keep that in mind. Next thing, sharpening on this guy is going to be a bit of a mess, right? Because you're not going to be able, although this surface here is actually reasonably flat, this one sure isn't. So you're not going to be able to do it on flat bench stones. You're also going to struggle with a lot of your guided systems because this has an internal radius there. And the guided systems often have, relatively small flat stones that you have to get up inside there. So as a result, you're going to need to be sharpening this on like a rod-based system or on a system like the KME, for instance, but a bunch of other ones also offer a recurved stone, basically, that has an internal or an external radius. It's a convex to match the concave here. You're going to keep that in mind. So this is going to be harder to sharpen because of this angle than a lot of the knives out there in the world. Next thing, closing this guy is actually a little dicey. Because it has a relatively smooth free drop in action, and because there's nothing there to shield your hands, it is very much a this is falling right towards me sort of moment. So you have to be careful as you're closing it. That's very different, and that's actually one of the downsides of not having a flipper tab. If we look at the Arroyo here as I'm closing this knife, this flipper tab stops. It stops against my thumb there. That allows me to close it the rest of the way. This doesn't do that so much. You can kind of use this, but the problem is when you do that, you're not so far off. Anyways, a little dicey, not the end of the world, though. Next thing, blade on this guy is a little thick, right? I get it, I guess, and maybe that was a choice to preserve the balance, but this is awfully thick. And I think the grind ends up being a little thicker than it needed to be. It's just a little bit weird. I see a knife like this, and it's just like, oh, did they not have the blade stock size you wanted? Whatever, it's not a big deal, but it definitely makes for the knife being a little bit less slicey, a little bit more weird than you might anticipate. Next thing, price on this guy. It's $200. Now, look, the world of $200 has changed a great deal in the last, 2 years, something like that. Because, it used to be, $200 titanium frame lock and S35 VN, that's a thing. But it's not so much a thing anymore. That price is getting brought down more and more, and especially for S35 VN and relatively plain titanium, $200 is no longer feeling like a strong value price. Other companies are definitely undercutting them here. I think for a Gavko fan who's after the design specifically, this could feel like a fine price, but if you're just looking for a pocket knife, this is no longer offering amazing value, and companies like Artisan need to be pushing the value or pushing the design. And so I'd like to see them push that value a little harder, but it's not the end of the world there. Next thing, ergos on this guy are a little weird in that this handle is very short, right? The blade is actually substantially taller than the handle. And as a result, you end up with something that is, relatively easy both to have rotate a little bit in your hand, as well as it doesn't fill the hand all that well. With my relatively small hands, I'm doing okay, but I can imagine somebody with big old hands feeling like, wow, I kind of wish there were a little more height to the handle there. And they probably could have pulled it off, but it would have interfered. Look, either way, it's just a factor. Then finally, the clip on this guy. The clip actually, it works okay. It's a little softer than I might like, but it's super thin. Look at this guy. The edge of this clip is very thin and actually a little bit sharp. Like, this is a very much a scratching clip, as in this could scratch other elements of your life. Like, this could put a nasty thing on your car if you walk past it too. Like, this little bit here is just sharper than it needs to be. There's a reason that a lot of clips end up having a bit of a round off there, as opposed to this guy, which just sticks right up into that angle. That's not great. There were a couple of times carrying this guy where I'd just like catch the side of my hand against it. It was just like, oh, that's right, I'm carrying that. So this is definitely a little bit too sharp there. And so to me, all that is the bad, is that this clip is way too thin and a little bit sharp in the back there. The ergos are a little weird with this short handle. The price isn't super competitive, although it's maybe more of a design piece. The blade stock is definitely thick. Closing, it's a little dicey. Sharpening is going to be a mess, and there is not a slow thumb opening option here. On the ugly front, look, some people are going to find ugly here, but I don't particularly. Like I said, I think I like this design, so let's go to the final conclusion, which is that this is interesting, right? It's got an interesting profile. Very thin, very carryable, no flipper tab. It's got decent ergos, nice blade, nice opening, solid action, distinctive design. It is flick only, of course. The sharpening is going to be rough. Closing, it does require care. Blade's a little thick. Price isn't amazing. Handles are a little bit over tall. I'm sorry, a little bit under tall. And the clip is a little over thin. Artisan, though, honestly, I feel like they've done a pretty good job with this guy here. It seems very much like a Gavko, and it's got a nice enough action to support it. Good enough construction overall, leading to a knife that feels maybe a little pricey if you're just looking at this as an S35 VN frame lock, but at the same time, generally solid. But this is one of those knives, ultimately, I think that is good, but you already know whether you want it or not, because you have to love the Gavko aesthetic. You have to want this design. You have to be willing to pay the price there. But if you have all of those things, the love for Gavko, the willing to pay the price, and the love of the design, then I think you're probably going to end up finding this great white pretty great. Anyways, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. I hope this review didn't shock you too much. Okay. Yeah. I'll stop jawing on. Bye now.